there's a way to make an entrance.
This is my destiny.
It was now a conspiracy of witches.
Download Veely today.
For over a century, the legendary tales that have surrounded our great British airfields have inspired generations of people, including me, which is why I am on a personal mission to cross the UK to visit some of our most important airfields, to understand not just about their contribution to our past, but importantly, how many of them have helped define our future. From the UK's first flight, through to groundbreaking innovations such as carbon fibre and the jet engine, and the extraordinary effort spent on preserving our aviation heritage. Join me as I explore the story of the airfields that have helped shape Britain and the world. The age of the long-range bomber is arguably over, as missiles and smaller multi-role aircraft have taken its place, but the story of the RAF bomber itself is a long and illustrious one, and few airfields are as perhaps connected to that story as here, RAF Coningsby. First opened in 1940, it's played a key role in the frontline defence of the United Kingdom for over 70 years. Perhaps the most famous British bomber of all time was the Avro Lancaster. No bomber before it or since has been as successful, and at the end of the Second World War, the head of Bomber Command, Air Chief Marshal Sir Arthur Harris, wrote to the makers Avro. I should say this to those who put that shining sword in our hand. Without your genius and your efforts, we would not have prevailed, for I believe the Lancaster to be the greatest single factor in winning the war. Today, there is only one left flying in Britain, and it's here at RAF Coningsby. Roger.
Hello, Jules.
Very nice to see you.
Pleasure to meet you.
I'm like a child in a sweet shop. This is the most incredible hangar. It's full of one of everything I would ever want to take home with me. The Battle of Britain Memorial Flight is such an institution. How did it come about?
A group of guys decided that there should be something that celebrated the Battle of Britain and to remember those brave few that gave their lives for the country. So there was 4 Spitfires started the flight, and then from there onwards it's grown and grown and grown. So now we have 2 Hurricanes, 6 Spitfires, Dakota, Lancaster and 2 Chipmunks.
Being surrounded by this fabulous collection, it's hard and unfair in a way to try and pick a favourite, but I'm going to stick my neck out now. For me, the most iconic aircraft of the Second World War has to be the Lancaster, and you get to fly it. What made it so special?
As you say, she is an iconic shape in the sky, iconic sound of 4 Merlins as well. We needed a heavy bomber to accomplish what the other bombers weren't doing. It was sort of born out of a design which was the Manchester first off, which wasn't a very successful aircraft. It had lots of problems and it was plagued with all sorts of troubles. Roy Chadwick, who designed it, then said, actually what we need to do is get more power to it and make it bigger and beef it up, and then it'll be exactly the machine you want.
Well, I am itching to take a closer look. You're the best man to show me around, Roger.
Come on in and welcome to the Lanc.
That is amazing. So, remind me of the crew. How many?
Working from the back then, you have the tail gunner right at the back.
Yep.
Then the mid-upper.
Yep.
Then working forward, you've got a signaller.
Yep.
As well. And then you have the flight deck crew of air engineer, navigator and pilot. And then forward of that, you've got a bomb aimer as well. And the bomb aimer would double up sometimes as the forward gunner as well.
The thing that strikes me, Roger, is that I'm wearing civilian clothes. I'm not wearing a wartime flying suit or a parachute. The idea of trying to move through this fuselage in a hurry to try and rescue a friend or indeed operate a piece of machinery or indeed bail out, it's hard to imagine, isn't it?
It is, yeah, and it's a tight space. It's it's a small space because the business of this aircraft is all about the bombs and the weapons. So as you can see, it's quite big on the outside, but very small on the inside. Just as something of interest is that the distance from the ammo box to the tail gunner is 9 yards. So the expression of giving the full 9 yards comes from a length of ammo being shot by the tail gunner.
I love stories like that. It's the sort of thing I remember long into my dotage. But keeping this aircraft in the air is an enormous challenge. You're having to revisit and relearn many of those tricks and skills that maintenance crews would have taken as second nature, I suppose, 70 odd years ago. There's obviously going to be elements of skill fade, but the person who you really want to speak to is one of our engineers. Jules, let me introduce you to Gary, one of our engineers. Gary, it's Jules.
Pleased to meet you.
Gary, nice to see you. This is fabulous. This is proper engineering. Are these genuine blueprints?
They are genuine blueprints, yeah.
So he gets to fly it and occasionally break it, challenge it, and you have to keep it up there, flying around for all to see and enjoy.
Yeah.
How difficult a job is it?
It can be difficult at times. I mean, the main problems we have is finding spares at short notice.
But of course you can't just go and draw a new part off the shelf as you would have done during the 40s. Do you have to manufacture a lot of parts?
We do have to manufacture a lot of parts now. But as long as we've got the original drawing and original material specs, we can have anything made.
How long have you been working on Lancasters for?
I've actually done 11 years in total.
Wow.
I have been back working on Tornadoes and Typhoons in between, but I managed to come back. I definitely prefer working on the Lancaster and the aircraft that we've got here. It's engineering, it is grassroots. It's what I joined up to do, and if you work on a Typhoon, computers tend to tell you what's wrong with it, and you're just changing boxes a lot of the time. Whereas here, we get the drawings out and we get things made.
So having spent months stripping it all down and putting it back together again, do you get to have a ride? Does he take you for a spin?
It does give us a spin. We do get to fly in the Lancaster, which is a massive privilege being on the flight.
Brilliant. That's a perk worth having, isn't it? Gary, thank you very much indeed. We'll leave you to your very technical drawings and we'll continue our tour, shall we, Roger?
Thank you.
Come and have a look up the front. Well, Jules, welcome to my world. This is where I get the best view of things.
This is your office. This is amazing.
This is my office, yes.
It looks, needless to say, incredibly complicated up here, Roger. Is it a delicate aircraft to fly? Because pilots did say they loved it.
It's not a delicate aircraft to fly. You do have to manhandle her around the skies. But because you do actively fly her around the skies, that's part of the appeal, that's part of the love for flying her.
Well, Roger, it's been an absolute treat to take such a close look at this aircraft, and it's perfectly clear that both in the air and on the ground, she is in very, very good hands. Thank you very much. In 1941, just as the first Lancasters were being tested by Avro, an inquiry was commissioned into the accuracy of bomber command. What it revealed was that on a routine mission such as those carried out by aircraft from RAF Coningsby, only 1 in 5 aircraft were capable of dropping their bombs within 5 miles of the target. It wasn't proving to be the strategically decisive weapon that Churchill had envisaged. In February 1942, the man charged with turning Bomber Command into an effective task force was Sir Arthur Harris. He envisaged massive raids using an organised approach to direct the bombers over their targets. On the night of the 30th of May 1942, 1,047 bombers headed towards the German city of Cologne. The results were devastating. Only 3% of the bombers that took part were lost, and a large percentage of targets were destroyed. Harris was able to demonstrate how effectively a large bomber force could inflict crucial damage. 2 more subsequent operations to Essen and Bremen became known as the 1,000 Bomber Raids. As a result, Bomber Command received increased resources, allowing them to play a crucial role in the final Allied victory. The most famous squadron to fly from Coningsby was 617, otherwise known as the Dambusters. Later on in the war, they moved to Woodall Spa, and this, the Petwood House Hotel, became their officers' mess. They were an elite bunch, specifically formed to deliver the brainchild of pioneering aviation engineer Barnes Wallis. Rob! Hello, mate, nice to see you.
Hi, Jules.
Look at this place, it's stuffed to the rafters with 617 memorabilia.
Well, welcome to the spiritual home of 617 Squadron.
Now, the walls are plastered in images of the squadron and its exploits, and of course, their heroes as well. And over there, Barnes Wallis. And in a way, we can't talk about 617 without starting with Wallis, because without him, it wouldn't have existed.
Certainly, because the squadron was formed specifically for one operation initially, and that was to deliver his bouncing bomb.
He was a remarkable engineer. I noticed on the way in you've got some drawings of the bomb. Can we take a closer look and try and understand how it worked and what he was trying to do?
Well, he was a remarkable engineer. I mean, he'd started off life just before the First World War. Having been a marine engineer, he switched to designing airships.
What encouraged him to start thinking about munitions?
Well, the thing was that he wanted to find a way of making a contribution to the war, and he thought, well, how best can an engineer bring the war to a rapid end? Now, before the war, the Air Ministry and the RAF had been looking at various targets, and amongst the targets, they'd looked at sources of power, but all the sources of power, be it coal mines or dams and that, simply too massive to be damaged by bombs of that period, which were relatively small and relatively ineffective. But Wallis latched onto this, and he thought, well, let's take a target like a dam. How can we actually knock a dam down? And his first idea was to create a very large bomb, a bomb of 10 tons, but then experimentation showed that even a large bomb dropped relatively close to the dam still wouldn't do it. And after that, they then found that a much smaller charge, but it placed directly in contact with the dam wall, would actually do the job. So you didn't need a big bomb, you just needed a small bomb, and you needed to get it in contact with the dam wall, and that was the problem.
And that was the challenge, to get the bomb into such a specific position that it could do its work against the dam.
Absolutely, and that's how he devised the bouncing bomb.
It is the most unconventional looking bomb in many respects. How difficult a job was it for Wallis to sell this to the Air Ministry?
Well, you imagine, bearing in mind that the damage raid hasn't happened and all this isn't history yet, and someone comes along to you and says, I've got this idea for a 4.5-ton bomb and I can make it bounce across the surface of a reservoir and hit a target. I mean, you're going to think that just another one of those crackpot schemes, isn't it?
The idea behind the bouncing bomb, known as upkeep, was to deliver a charge to the base of a German dam where it would cause the most damage. In theory, if dropped at a certain speed, angle and point on the lake, upkeep would bounce along the water, hop over the torpedo nets, hit the dam, sink straight down to the optimal depth for destruction and detonate.
Well, this all looks a little bit Heath Robinson, Rob.
Well, I mean, it is in many respects, but this is exactly how Wallis started out testing his theory, which developed into the bouncing bomb.
So we've got a tin bar full of water, a string suspended between two canes and a table at the far end. What was the idea?
Well, really, in order to develop his idea, first thing Wallis needed to do, apart from to establish whether or not you could actually bounce something off water, but he needed to establish the law of ricochet and prove that it could be done consistently. So what you've got to do is you've got to imagine that here is a catapult.
So I'm the catapult.
He took his missile, for which he used one of his daughter's marbles,
Right.
and placed it in the catapult, fired it at a low angle,
Yep.
the intention being to ricochet it off the surface of the water, over this string, to land on the table.
And he's looking to find a formula that's going to predict that consistently.
Exactly. What he's trying to do is to have an experiment he can replicate in order to calculate basically the law of ricochet. And for that, he simply needs a number of inputs, which is the force or the speed of the marble being projected, the height at which it bounces, which he can determine by the string,
Yeah.
and then the distance that the bounce has taken. So from those, he can actually calculate the curve of trajectory. And by doing that and varying the inputs, he can come up with the mathematical formula he's looking for.
It is remarkable, though, when you think about it, from such humble beginnings, this very simple experiment is transformed in the mind of this incredibly talented and dedicated engineer into what becomes arguably the most audacious air raid of the war.
Really, the crunch comes on the eve of the operation, when the squadron are being told for the first time what they're going to do, and Wallace stands in front of them and explains the weapon. I'm sure there must have been some element going through his mind of thinking, I hope my calculations are correct.
But they were going out to conduct the ultimate experiment, I suppose, in the mind of the scientist.
Yes, I mean, you could put it that way, and it was an experiment over which he had no control.
But the raid was on.
The raid was on.
On the night of the 16th of May 1943, 19 Lancasters left for Germany. 617 Squadron were entrusted with the task of crippling 3 key German dams, the Möhne, the Eder and the Sorpe. The attack was called Operation Chastise and utilised the ingenious bouncing bomb designed by Wallace.
The 5 crews, of which we were one, were briefed for the Sorpe. And of course, the Sorpe had to be different. It didn't have any towers, so there's no sighting to go to it. It was so placed in the hills that a head-on attack was very difficult, in fact almost impossible. The first thing we noticed was that on the hill through down which we were supposed to make the attack, there was a church spire halfway down. So Joe said, right, I'm using that as a marker, and used that to line up the aircraft as best he could onto the target. If I wasn't satisfied, I called dummy run. If Joe wasn't satisfied, he just pulled away and left me to call dummy run. And at that stage, after about the 6th or 7th of these, Dave Roger came up with, won't somebody get that bum out of here? I had to realise how to become the most unpopular member of crew in double quick time. But there we were. So on the 10th run, we were down to 30 feet. And when I said, bomb gone, thank Christ came from the rear turret. But then, being so low, it was nose up straight away. So I didn't see the explosion. But Dave did, and he estimated that the water went up to about 1,000 feet. We looked around, and we had crumbled the top of the dam, distance of about 10 yards. Barnes Wallace had told us that because of the structure of the Sorpe, it would take at least 6 bombs to crack it. Yet if you can crack it, the water pressure will do the rest. And judging from the amount of water in that dam, yes, I'm sure he was right.
Operation Chastise breached the Möhne and the Eder dams and damaged the Sorpe, but the losses were high. Out of the 19 Lancasters that took part, 3 had to turn back, leaving just 16 to complete the mission. Of those, 8 were lost, along with 56 aircrew.
As far as the raid itself was concerned, yes, it was a success. It proved to Hitler and the German hierarchy that what they thought was impregnable, the Royal Air Force could get through and destroy. And it meant that the skilled workmen that were working on a anti-invasion wall along the coast had to be withdrawn to work on the repair of the dams. But I think the greatest advantage was the morale effect it had on the people of this country. I was one of the lucky ones, in the right crew, in the right time, in the right place, and equally lucky to get back.
The military effectiveness of Operation Chastise has long been debated, but its value as a propaganda tool and as a morale booster cannot be denied. And perhaps most importantly of all, it gave the British public hope that after nearly 4 years of fighting, at last the tide of the war could be turning in their favour.
Rob, after the success of the Dams raid and the bouncing bomb, Wallace is very moved by the loss of life amongst the aircrews that took part, isn't he?
Very much so. He'd stood in front of the crews that were going off to do the operation. He'd spoken to them, he'd seen them in front of him. And then, of course, the following morning, he saw, in effect, the empty tables and realised the human cost of the development and his weapon in terms of aircrew lives. And he was extremely moved by this.
But it doesn't put him off, and he goes on to develop bigger and better munitions, now ably supported by the head of Bomber Command, Air Chief Marshal Sir Arthur Harris, who, let's face it, was pretty sceptical about the bouncing bomb.
Harris has allegedly turned to him after the operation and said, well, Wallace, I didn't believe a word that you told me, but now you could sell me a pink elephant. And in fact, here we actually have, I suppose, what you might call the pink elephant.
This is it. Is this the famous tall boy?
That's right. Wallace reverted back to his original concept of a large bomb that would penetrate deep into the ground, causing an earthquake effect. And Harris had in fact given him the green light to go ahead and develop this. So here we have it. This is Tall Boy. It's a 12,000-pound deep penetration bomb. The concept being that dropped from high altitude, it's a very heavy bomb. It will hit the ground and penetrate deeply underground before exploding, and then when it detonates, the shockwave will travel through the earth and shake any structure in the vicinity.
But Rob, I suppose in many ways the development of this particular bomb once again continues this now established relationship between 617 Squadron and the mind of Wallace. The two things are absolutely interdependent upon each other.
Very much so, yes. And of course, it was from here at Woodhall Spa that the squadron carried out its operations using Wallace's bombs of Tall Boy and Grand Slam. Initially, the first attack was made against a railway tunnel, which proved the earth-moving qualities of the weapon. It then went on to be used against U-boat pens, V-weapon sites, and of course Germany's most fearsome battleship Tirpitz.
Rob, how would you assess the legacy of Wallace's contribution to the war effort?
Well, it was certainly significant in that Wallace provided Bomber Command with the weapons to destroy major targets which they would otherwise been unable to destroy, and at the same time Bomber Command provided Wallace with a way of delivering those weapons with precision in the form of 617 Squadron.
Second only to the attrition suffered by U-boat crews, serving in Bomber Command was arguably the most dangerous profession of the war. Of 125,000 aircrew who served, some 55,000 lost their lives. It's an enormous figure, equal to the population of a small town. Here at Coningsby Cemetery, in amongst the Commonwealth war graves, is one that is dedicated to an unknown airman. And it serves as a poignant reminder to all of those who lost their lives throughout 6 years of the aerial campaign.
Following the success of the bouncing bomb, Barnes-Wallis returned to developing even larger weapons. These would allow bombers from RAF Coningsby and other air bases to target reinforced structures like U-boat pens and secret rocket sites. Wallace produced deep penetration earthquake bombs. First the Tall Boy at 6 tons and then the Grand Slam at 10.
Now, to really understand the physics and the mechanics behind the earthquake or the Tall Boy bomb, you really need to somehow see it in action. Now, of course, we don't have a real one that we can just let off, but we can get close to it. So I have enlisted the help of my old mate, Tony Lewis, a man whose passion for military history is equalled only by his passion for pyrotechnics. If anyone can help us make a bag, it's him.
Nice and square.
Tony! Hello,
Jules, how you doing?
I'm very well, mate. How are
Excellent.
you?
Not bad, a little bit mutton Jeff these days.
A little bit deaf?
Aye.
How are your fingers?
All there.
Something's going well. Now tell me, what is going on here?
What we're doing is we're building a structure to help to show the effects of the blast and overpressure from, in this case, a 500-pound general purpose bomb that would have been used in carpet bombing. And what we're going to show is that a surface blast wouldn't knock down a structure of this type.
But an earthquake bomb would.
It certainly would.
So this is a typical structure you might find supporting a bridge, a railway, that sort of thing. So why wouldn't a conventional bomb shatter this in a way that an earthquake bomb might have done?
Well, I could show you that. I've got a small version here.
What's this from?
This is actually a Stuka fragmentation bomb. The thing with this type of bomb is when it hits the ground, it explodes. And so all the explosive energy is dissipated into the atmosphere. We'll get a small crater, okay, a reasonable crater, but most of the energy's gone into the atmosphere.
Brilliant. Well, we better finish building this then.
Okay, yeah, if you don't mind grabbing some blocks and we'll complete it.
It's like a sort of giant Jenga, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, there's some weight to this. I mean, it's not going to blow over in the wind, is it?
No.
Last one, Tony. You get the privilege of that.
Okay.
There we go. So how big a charge are you going to put next to this to simulate our 500-pound bomb?
Okay, obviously this is a model of a structure, so we're going to do a scaled down version. We're going to use 0.5 kilo TNT. and that will simulate the effect of a general purpose bomb. Okay, exploding above surface, you'll see the shockwave propagate out, and you'll see that the tower will still be there.
You are so confident. I love it, Tony. I love your confidence. You haven't let me down in the past, mate.
No, I won't let you down this time neither.
Right then, let's get on with stage 1 and detonate our 500 pounder.
Let's do it. Okay, Jules, there we go. This is the firing point.
Ah, this is what I'm after.
Okay, get your defenders on.
Let's have a concrete wall between us and that.
Yes, definitely.
Right, mate. I like this, Tony. This is very old school.
Yes, it's German Second World War.
You're joking.
It's just ideal for the job. It's designed for bridge demolition, etc.
Only you would have one of those.
Oh, she's my little baby. Okay, we'll wind her up.
Yep. Okay.
You good?
Good.
Okay, stand by. 3, 2, 1.
I didn't see any bits.
No. I think she'll still be standing.
Pint says it's still standing.
On that.
Wow.
She's still there, Jules.
I owe you a pint.
And as you could see, very much like a general purpose bomb would do, it's dug a crater. A certain amount has hit the tower. You've got a certain amount of debris.
Yeah, there's a bit of grass up there, look.
Yeah.
And it all smells a bit of explosive, actually. And
Yes, yeah.
fuel. And you can see where it sort of charred it somewhat, and the grass around about. But you can see what a challenge Bomber Command faced when trying to take out targets like this, even with hundreds, thousands of conventional bombs. You could get close to it, but actually not really scratch it.
And even if you did hit it, you know, it didn't tend to blow the structure to pieces. It would blow a piece off it.
Well, I can't wait to see what your tall boy will do to this concrete tower, Tony.
I think you'll find it's not standing.
Well, listen, I've already lost a pint so far. I'm not going to bet again.
Well, I'll settle on a nice steak and kidney pie for this one.
All right, you're on.
Okay.
Go on then.
The effect of a 500-pound general-purpose bomb used in carpet bombing would only create a surface blast. What Wallace did was to take it a step further, producing bombs that would go deeper into the earth before exploding, creating an earthquake effect underneath the structure. So let's see how well our tower fares with this explosion.
So what I want you to do first is we need to prime up the exploder. So if you can wind that up until it comes to a stop. It's quite a strong spring.
Here we go. Our tall boy underneath our pile of concrete blocks. Stand by! 3, 2, 1.
Excellent.
There is almost certainly no chance that that is still there. Oh my goodness me! Look at that. That's astonishing. Not only is the tower not standing, but look at the
Debris,
field.
all being lifted out of the ground. Okay, and did you feel the shockwave coming through the ground towards us?
Oh yeah. And this is a tiny handful of TNT.
Yeah.
Not 22,000 pounds worth of it.
So you can imagine, in scale, a very similar effect to what the tall boy would give.
I didn't expect a hole this big.
Yes, we've got some filling in to do.
But how did the bomb itself not explode on impact? How did it get so deep underground before going off?
Barnes Wallis, very clever man. He used Torpex, which is a very powerful explosive, but also a stable explosive, so it could withstand the impact of hitting the ground and not going off through the shock. He also used a hardened bomb casing, okay, that would withstand hitting the ground and penetrating it without shattering the casings. And he also used the height and the aerodynamics of the bomb, which would travel at over 700 miles an hour, so it's breaking the sound barrier.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, and as you can see from this, it's not a case of hitting the structure.
No.
It's better just to miss, okay, and then rely on the shockwave travelling through the ground to bring the structure down. And you can really see that.
A finer demonstration, Tony, I could not have hoped for.
I'm proud myself.
Come on then. I'll sort you out with that pint of pint now.
Aye. Maybe some chips and peas?
Wish you luck now, look.
The years following the Second World War saw political and military tension between the East and West grow, resulting in the Cold War. It was also a time of rapid development in technology, with the advancement of the jet engine and nuclear weapons. It was a combination of these that culminated in Britain's V bombers: the Valiant, the Vulcan and the Victor, 3 jet-powered monsters designed to carry Britain's nuclear weapons.
In 1962, with the Cold War reaching its climax, Coningsby welcomed its first squadron of Vulcans, and they were housed in these very distinctive Gaydon hangars, notable because of those huge double doors to accommodate the Vulcan's enormous tail fin. And the hangar itself is a great demonstration of the difference in scale between the Vulcan and one of the RAF's modern multi-role aircraft. Now, there is today only one V bomber, as they were known, left flying, the XH-558.
The Vulcan is quite a different aircraft to a lot of aircraft. It's a big aeroplane, but it has very, very powerful controls. So even though the aircraft is about the size of an Airbus airliner, it flies and feels more like a fighter. So it's got very powerful flight controls, and we have a control stick rather than a control column, which you might expect in a big aeroplane.
The Vulcan was first manufactured in 1952 and was the backbone of the UK's airborne nuclear deterrent. From 1957 to 1969, it stood by for 24 hours a day, armed with nuclear weapons, ready to take off within 2 minutes of a Soviet attack. Luckily, it was never called into action.
The Vulcan actually is going to eventually stop flying, unlike a sort of a vintage car where you can keep driving the car over and over providing you pass the MOT. Aeroplanes have a finite life. I feel very privileged to fly the Vulcan. There's only one Vulcan flying in the world, and there's only a handful of us that actually fly the aircraft, so I'm very lucky to that end. I will be very sad when we stop flying her.
RAF Coningsby was the base for 3 operational squadrons of Vulcans during the 1960s, but more technological advances meant they were replaced. The last airworthy Vulcan is maintained and flown by members of the Vulcan to the Sky Trust in Doncaster.
Wow, look at that. You know, each year that passes could be the last that this incredible Vulcan is kept in the air, but to look after it and maintain it to such a high standard is, as you can appreciate, an ongoing struggle, which is why I've come to meet the engineers who make it all possible. And as you can see, to offer them my humble services. It's also a brilliant excuse to get my hands dirty. Oh, Taff. Hello, mate. How are you? Good to see you.
Judge. Nice, eh?
Wow, you can smell the fuel.
Yes.
What are you doing?
During the winter, what we're doing is replacing a couple of the fuel drain traps. We need to test the fuel every so often for any water and reseating them now and again.
You've been working on these aircraft for how long?
On and off over 30 years now. Done 26 years in the RAF, joined up as a young lad and come out to training straight onto the Vulcans.
So you remember what it was like, what the atmosphere was like for the ground crews and the air crews when these were a nuclear deterrent?
Yes, I was still working on the aircraft. In fact, one of the jobs as an electrician was actually test out the nuclear systems.
What I find astonishing is the relatively short period of time between the Lancaster, say, and this.
It was completely new, straight at the back end of the Second World War. It was designed by the same people who done the Lancaster, and there's only 11 years difference between the flight test of the Lancaster and a flight test of a Vulcan.
Now, look, I'm kitted up, I'm ready to go. I'm happy to get as mucky as you like. What are you up to here again?
We're just replacing one of the fuel drain valves, and what you can do, if you like, you can fit the new one.
Is this it?
Yep, that's the new one there.
Is that something that's brand new? Do you have to make that?
No, we've actually got this from one of the manufacturers, and in fact there's a label in here, look, come from the overhaul back in 1989 when they bought the aeroplane off as scrap value when it was sold off in 93. They bought, say, over 600 tonnes of spare, so luckily we do have a spare one of these.
So what's the trick then, Taff?
Well, the trick is we'll take the cap off, put the new washer on for you, and if you'd like to get yourself some gloves and glasses, you can fit it. if you think you're clever enough.
Well, you know, I'm a shocker for over-tightening things. We don't want to get it cross-threaded, do we? Because
no,
otherwise we'll have
that's
to...
the last thing we need to do.
Otherwise
you'll just ground a £10 million aeroplane and it'll be around about 200,000 people who won't see it next year.
Yeah, there's no pressure then.
No pressure at all. Yep, we've just come up this ladder here. I think it'll be the easiest one for you to go up.
Gosh, look at all... I mean, all of these avionics, all of these pipes and anodised parts. I mean, it is incredible the amount of equipment and paraphernalia that goes into keeping even what appear to be the simplest systems running.
It is, yeah. It's all the various fuel supply pipes into and out of the fuel tanks, and that's what supplies the engines.
So I'm just putting that straight into that?
Yeah, into that hole.
Now, I don't want fuel running down my wrist if I can help it. There we go. Oh, there we go. Right. There's the fuel. She's in.
She's in.
How about
Hurrah!
that? Hey!
I'll make an engineer out of you yet.
There we are. Brilliant.
There you are. You have helped service the last flying Vulcan in the world.
Well, I just am astounded that this aircraft is still flying. And when you look at the minutiae of what has to happen to keep it in the air, I think it's not just a credit to you, but also a credit to its design.
Well, it is iconic. It's the unique shape of it, and it's the size, the power, and as I say, once seen, heard and felt, when you get at maximum power, it's never forgot.
If this wasn't available to play with, what would you do with yourself?
Probably have to find a proper job.
Well, you did a great job with this one, mate. Thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thankfully, the V bombers were never used for their intended purpose, but in many ways you could argue that they fulfilled their brief. They helped prevent the outbreak of a nuclear war by acting as a very potent nuclear deterrent.
The only time the Vulcan would ever fly in anger was during the Falklands War in 1982, when the Vulcan was tasked with a conventional bombing mission to take out runways and radar stations. It would be the last mission flown by this iconic aircraft.
There are no longer any heavy bombers based at Coningsby or indeed the rest of the UK. But fear not, these bomb-proof Cold War hangars are now home to something else, something far more potent. The Eurofighter Typhoon. This is it, arguably the most capable aircraft the RAF has ever possessed, and it just goes to show what can happen if you lock aero engineers from Germany, Italy, Spain and Britain in a room and leave them there for long enough. That's exactly what they did back in 1988, and this is what they came up with 15 years later. Much of its design is still top secret. That red bag on the front there, that's covering up the air intake. I'm not allowed to show it to you. It's that sensitive. It can carry a suite of weapons, you name it. It can do it, air to air, air to surface. And here, this is the business end. 2 EJ200 engines, each one developing some 20,000 pounds of thrust. That means the Eurofighter can travel at 1.8 Mach. That's nearly twice the speed of sound. It really is a phenomenal piece of engineering. And when you consider, what, 100 years ago, we were just about getting into the air, look where we've come. This is the future. This is the 21st century fighter in all its glory.
There are between 40 and 50 Typhoons at Coningsby at any one time, belonging to 4 RAF squadrons.
Well, Justin, that's the future, isn't it? The Typhoon.
Yeah.
We no longer talk about heavy bombers in terms of the RAF's infantry. What brought about their decline?
We've gone away from heavy bombers as such and into a more multi-role fighter aircraft. But the effect is the same. We can still deliver bombs on target with a multi-role aircraft like Typhoon. And the difference is we don't need to carry as many because we can precisely put those bombs where we'd like to.
And in terms of that capability, how flexible is it? Because in the old days we'd have bomber pilots and we'd have fighter pilots. Now, as a Typhoon pilot, you have to do both.
We have to do all roles, yeah. So our 2 squadrons, our 2 frontline squadrons here at Coningsby, the pilots are trained in all roles. And we can swing from one to the other almost on a daily basis.
Now, going back, say, 70 years to those heady days during the war when Bomber Command possessed thousands of aircraft, Is it possible to equate a squadron of Typhoon, say, to a number of squadrons in terms of the punch that they can pack?
You could always go back to what the effect is you want. So if you want to take down, let's say, World War II, a number of factories, you would calculate how many bombs you would need to do that and get actually on target. Then you'd work back and say, well, this would take 20 Lancasters. And with the accuracy of those weapon aiming systems and the bomb itself, that's probably how much you'd need. With Typhoon, we can say that bomb will go in that particular place. We don't need as many aircraft to do the same mission because the technology allows us to be more precise in what we're delivering.
Now, we do live in very different times. The threats that are posed towards the United Kingdom now come in varying forms.
Yes.
How quickly can your boys get airborne?
How long's this piece of string? And we like to keep people guessing with that particular question.
Yeah.
I mean, every minute of every day we're ready to tackle whatever threat is put the UK's way, and we're here to defend our skies.
Justin, you've had the chance to fly some of the most iconic aircraft that the RAF have possessed over the last 75 years, starting with the Spitfire and now currently on the Typhoon. What's your favourite?
It's a difficult question. As you say, I've flown some pretty serious hardware. Typhoon is the most awesome fighter jet that I've flown. The power it has is truly remarkable. However, the Spitfire just has that X factor. It's iconic. It carries with it a lot of history, a lot of memories, and it is a true fighter pilot's aircraft. So the Spitfire has it.
When you fly a Spitfire, your mind must cast itself back to the days when that was developed and to those men who flew it.
I had one particular moment flying a Spitfire over Kent where I realised I was flying through the same airspace that the Battle of Britain happened 75 years ago. And that was quite an emotional moment when I sat in a Spitfire in that bit of airspace. So we're very proud of our history, and that ethos carries on today with the fighter pilots across the runway here on the front lines.
Coningsby is a survivor. It was christened in the 1940s. It evolved through the Second World War, the Cold War, and today remains very much at the front line of Britain's air defences here in the 21st century. Its aircraft, from the Battle of Britain Memorial flight with its Hurricanes, Spitfires and of course its Lancaster, through to its modern squadrons of sophisticated Typhoons, in many respects encapsulate the story of the RAF. But also there's something else. Not only does it capture its spirit, it also points the way to its future.